surrounded by Carlton history, which is an opportune time and place for us to discuss some of the great recruiting coups of all time of the Carlton Football Club. Some of the experiences of visiting families of prospective recruits. You know, I guess to get to players, you have to be amenable to the families of these players. You know, by and large, you had good relationships with the parents of the players you got into the club.
Oh yeah, and particularly players that were country and the interstate ones. You really you're really representing the club and the face of the club at the time. And I must admit that was one thing I always enjoyed. You know, sort of meeting the parents and. Like I feel now I could go anywhere around Australia and knock on the door of a lot of people's places and have great conversations with the people that you've met. But it was a real, to me, it was, you really had to set the scene and, how good the club was and what we could do for them and how we're going to look after them. Particularly the younger players, that's the most important thing, where they're going to live, who they're living with, all those sort of things. Where perhaps the early days, the interstate boys are a bit older, so you didn't have to, you could put them up in an apartment and things like that. But, the young country boys coming down, perhaps the 19s and that, you really had to make sure that the families were comfortable where they were going to be and who they were mixing with. So, that was and it was good, you go up to the country and, some of these farmers and that, God, you get a beautiful roast lunch, it was fantastic. Because our farmers have 3 good meals a day. So, there was a lot of good times on those. And, as I say, the other thing was when you tried to get a Form 4 or a player to sign a Form 4, you really sort of, were the main one to sort of convince them that, to sign with the club in those days. So, you had people like Noel Judkins and Greg Miller you had to sort of fight hard against, so that was always a big challenge.
And we live in an era now where football intelligence, is sophisticated, and probably everyone knows who's out there.
Yeah.
But in those earlier days, were clubs able to hide players? Did that happen?
It did happen a bit. I mean, one club particularly, I don't say sort of hid, but Greg Miller was pretty good at getting young fellas, if a family was split and either mum or dad was in their zone, he'd move them over to that zone. I mean, there was a bit of that sort of stuff going on. But you can't, as Johnny Beveridge said, as time's gone on, you can't do any shifty business. But these days, you just can't, everyone knows, from a young age where everyone is and, everyone sort of, everyone knows who's who sort of thing. So, all those little fun and games, you just can't get up to anymore.
Backtracking a little bit, another player that comes to mind, because again, this was really, by today's standards, unique. You certainly won't see it happen again, where a player walks in off the street effectively. Talking about Paul Meldrum.
Yep.
Can you tell that story, please?
Well, I just read recently a bit about it, and it's not quite the story that I remember, but I can remember Dave Willis was played in our under-19s and that sort of stuff, and said, look, can a mate of mine, Paul Meldrum, come and have a run? And I said, no problems. And I think he might have been in our zone, and said, not a problem. So anyway, did pre-season and going along, and then we were having a practice match out on number 1 Oval. And no mobile phones in those days. And Wes Loss said to me, look, tell that young Meldrum he's not required. And I said, oh, okay. And so I started to walk out to the ground before the practice match. And Anne McLeod, the lady in the office, come running out, oh, you want it on the phone. So I went back in, spoke on the phone. I just forget who I was talking to, but for a good half hour or something, and come back out, and Wes is coming towards me. And I'm thinking, gee, someone's got hurt or whatever. And he said, oh, have you told that Paul Meldrum yet? And I said, no, I haven't been able to get to him. Don't worry, he can play. So, I mean, it could have gone either way. If I hadn't have got that phone call, Molly might have, missed out playing with us, and was leading the Brownlow at one stage years later.
Unbelievable story. David Glascott.
Yep.
Now, there's another interesting story. A player who had a lot of success here at Carlton. What were the circumstances there?
Well, he's pretty special a person, Glazer. His dad and that, I think they lived out in the Footscray area when they got married, and I think they ended up moving to Thomastown because David's dad said, if my sons are good enough to play league football, I want them playing for Carlton. So in zoning in those days. So they moved and then to Thomastown, and they had two boys who did play for Carlton, and David's unique. I reckon it's a great story. He's played VFL stroke AFL premiership, under 19 premiership player, reserve grade premiership player, captain. But at the start he was a cheeky little fellow. I had to bring him in the office a few times and read him the right act about don't be a smarty and let people finish their conversations.
We talked earlier about Platten as an illustration of maybe the one who got away, but of course it also happened here in the reverse, where Carlton acquired players that maybe it shouldn't have got, and one such player is Tommy Alvin.
Yep.
What were the circumstances with Tommy Alvin's recruitment?
Well, I was on left and gone to Footscray, and of course that was our zone, Footscray zone. It always amazed me that Footscray were over in the western suburbs, Hawthorn were over in the east. Hawthorn goes sort of first part of Gippsland. We had to go right across town, past Hawthorn zone, to get to Footscray zone, which to me seemed weird, but anyway. But so we had Tommy Alvin down at a function at my place, I remember, because we're trying to, he was a bit hesitant about coming, where we had Brian Royal, who was a teammate of his at Banstar. He had already come and joined the club, and I can remember we had this big night at my place, and had the families and everyone. And anyway, a few weeks went on, and I said to my brother Gary Merrington, where I did all the recruiting, brother Gaz lived in our zone, and I said, I smell a rat, something's not worked, something's not right here. And I remember sending them up there to speak to Tommy, and they said, yeah, something's going on. Colo had got to him, and the rules were a bit loose at that stage, so he ended up coming to Carlton, and but in those days you got a transfer fee, and I must admit the transfer was pretty good, and it sort of helped the coppers at Footscray who badly needed it. But it ended up being a great player for Carlton, and still a great supporter of the place.
We spoke earlier about 95, and of course the Norm Smith medalist, Grand Final Day 95, was Greg Williams, and I can't think of a more complicated way of getting a player into the club as Carlton did with him in that period. Do you know the story behind the story there about how Carlton acquired Diesel?
Yeah, well, just going back a little bit, I can remember I feel a bit like it's a bit of my fault that he wasn't here in the first place, because I'd go up and watch him train at Bendigo for pre-season and that. And but you had Alex Marcoux, Kenny Sheldon, Rod Ashman, Jimmy Buckley. I mean, pretty good. So unfortunately, Greg, just couldn't. I felt, and the match committee and all that felt the same, that he just perhaps a bit slow and all that. But so wind sort of the clock a bit forward. Well, Colo, I remember, had Darren Kapler, who he got him into the club, and Darren thought he was going to end up at Carlton.
From Fitzroy.
From Fitzroy, sorry. And just near the death knock, Colo walks out and presented him with a cheque and shook his hand and said, son, you're off to Sydney. And we ended up getting Greg, and there was a few other bits and pieces. But, Colo was a master at, if there was a cut-off time, say 2 o'clock or whatever, he'd tell them that ring in the AFL, look, the fax machine's not working. Something's jammed. So, and until it eventually got everything signed. But, that was a part of getting Greg here. And, it was, we all saw, and what a great player. So you feel bad, perhaps we should have had him a lot earlier. But at the end of the day, we got him here.
What was good about recruiting? What was bad about recruiting?
I think just to, as I said in the old days, to sort of pit yourself against other clubs to get some of the players that you thought were good enough and things like that. Just meeting families, and you don't think of it perhaps at the time, but, later on that, the great relationships you still have with people. Probably the worst thing about it was really, particularly later on, in this sort of modern times, the time you spent away from family and travel and things like that, where, as I said, you only had the two Form 4s, where now, you pick them from everywhere. So I really, near the end of the year, I used to dread, I must admit, going to the airport near the end of the year, because you've been on and off planes. It sounds fun, but it's still hard work, and you spend a lot of time away from family. I think my kids and everyone are still waiting for me to take them to the snow. You don't do that in footy season. So but overall, it's I've been involved in lots of parts of footy, and that was the best part.
Who would you say your greatest friends made out of football?
Gee whiz, I've got to be careful. I might, well, pretty good friends with Mark McClure and his wife, because Carol, my wife, went to school. So Mark and I and Virginia were sort of pretty close. Have been pretty close over the journey. Got good relationships with Parko and Mick Malthouse. I don't mind saying I'm quite close with Kevin Sheedy over the journey. If it wasn't for sort of Kevin, I probably wouldn't. He's one of the guys that convinced me to, or helped me get the job at Carlton at the time.
Really?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Just through, I was playing footy in Queensland, and a guy called Max Scales, who was involved at Cooperoo, become GM at Richmond, and we were pretty close to his family. And when I come back to Melbourne and playing in the VFA, there's a job advert, and he rang me and said, this is for you. And Kevin I knew through Graham Richmond in the hotel game. A cousin of mine was in the pub game, so I knew him. So between those two guys, they pushed me to apply for the job. I applied for it. Greg Kennedy got the job, famous good full forward for the Blues. And then, 3 or 4 months, it might have been a little bit longer, I got a phone call from Keith McKenzie to see if I was still interested in the job. Greg's gone back to carpet laying. I thought, why would you go back pushing your knee against the thing to get the carpet on the floor? But and they said, when could you start? And I said, I'll be there tomorrow if you want me. So so through sort of Sheeds and those sort of people, Alan Swab at the time, you get to know, and I think playing in those days in the VFA on a Sunday, Saturday VFA Sunday, it helped me here, because the boys knew that you're playing a reasonable standard footy, and if you did say something, and you sort of qualified, if that's the right word, to talk footy with them. So and so lucky that God, that era of players, Southby, Mackay, Armstrong's, Kia, because you could, Ashman's, you could just go right through them. It was just great to be involved in. It was a great time, and every Saturday night after a game, we'd end up Peter Poynton's hotel, unannounced, partners, everyone. So it was a pretty special time, and so lucky to come to Carlton when I did.
The other pivotal moment happened not long after, in 1980, when Peter Jones took over as coach of the Carlton Football Club, and there was a game against Richmond at VFL Park, Waverley.
Final.
And it was the quarter-time break, I think, if memory serves.
Yep.
So the two teams are gathering for their respective huddles, where Peter Jones and Tony Jewell, the Richmond coach. What happened in that moment?
A guy called Rudy Webster was a great mate of Wes and Persis, who had been around Carlton. He was a West Indian, and his reputation was, getting Viv Richards to be what he was. So he was sort of a sports psych. I don't know if he was a qualified one, but anyway. So he left Carlton and went to Richmond. And in those days, he kept telling the Richmond blokes, if you're really physical and belt into Carlton, players, they'll fold. So at quarter time, we got players getting stitched and and Peirce knew that he would have said that. So when Rudy was walking out the ground, Peirce was yelling out obscenities to him. I can't tell you what he was saying, but just use your imagination. And then I grabbed Peirce and said, "Come on, mate, you got to talk to the boys." Well, Peirce was off his head. He was just... Anyway, finally spoke to the boys, and then we're dispersing, and he's still yelling at Rudy Webster. And Tony Jewell heard it and saw it, and he come rushing over and said, you so-and-so, and threw one to the left, and Peirce stuck. But the thing that worried me the most when I'm in trying to separate him, I could hear Bruce Comben roaring up behind me, and Bruce would rather fight than a feed. And so I thought, if Bruce gets involved, we're in real trouble here. So anyway, we broke it up, and they dispersed. And then the next day at World of Sport, you know, as you would remember, Lou or someone interviewed the two coaches, and and unbeknownst to they brought Rudy in, and he put his arms around, and it was so it was, they were great, great mates still, but that, if you felt Carlton, that's what's going to happen. So so that was sort of what caused that fray anyway.
There's two stories really that I have to ask you to tell, Shane, not necessarily relating to recruits, but to moments in time in Carlton history. The first is Grand Final Day 1979, when the whips were cracking late, and the captain coach, Alex Jesaulenko, was taken from the field by trainers, badly damaged his ankle. Yep. Jez had disappeared up the race with the game still in the balance. Could you talk about what actually happened in those last couple of frenetic minutes?
Well, I'm trying to ring Wes and the match.
So you're actually taking over as...
Well, I was on the phone to the match committee in those days on the bench, and Jez has gone up the race, and I'm waiting for him to tell me who they want to go on the ground. And anyway, no one had answered, or for some reason, so I just said, "Kenny, quick, get on the ground. Kenny, just get out there," and And anyway, they finally, "What do you want?" I said, "Well, I've just put Kenny Sheldon on the ground." "Well, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, Jez is up the race." They didn't see him go up the race, so which was weird. So you would have thought someone would have saw him. But so I felt like I'd made a coaching move in '79.
Well, it paid off. We
got
there.
And then Jezza come bouncing out. So the adrenaline took over, and if I can just, quick little story, we had the function at the Hilton in East Melbourne in those days, and I can remember, we're getting called into the big room, and Jezza's grabbed me and said, "Come into the bar and let's talk about the game." Well, I couldn't believe Alex Jesaulenko wanted to talk to me about the game. So, those little things sort of really make you feel like a part of the place, because during that season in '79, I'd come and pull tyres with him, and because he didn't train a lot with the team, but he did a lot of training during the day. So, just to talk to this god about a game was pretty special.
And it remains one of the great enduring mysteries that Alex, though he was hurt, was captain coach of the club, therefore still really had to call the shots late in that game, and never did. So I think one of the great questions is, why did he allow the trainers to take him up the race and away from the play when the game still had to be won? Yeah,
I must admit, I've sort of never, I suppose the adrenaline and all that, and then, why didn't you find out or whatever, but perhaps they thought they were doing the right thing, because he was in a fair bit of pain at the time. And then the excitement of winning and all that, and then unfortunately, Alex and that end up parting ways. But I must admit, I should ask him. I've never thought about it, to tell you the truth.